Hello. Welcome. Today's video is on the INFJ dark side. We're going to get into grip stress, specifically for the INFJ. That would be extroverted sensing grip or an SE grip. We're also going to talk about the inferior, just in general for all types. So even if you're not an INFJ, you can see how this applies to your type. And then additionally, we'll talk about shadow functions, specifically using the John Beebe archetypal model. So let's get into it. I had a first video in which I talked about the conscious functions of an INFJ. So if you want to check that out, I'll link it above and below. But today we're going to focus on the INFJ dark side. And hello, curious explorers. Welcome to my channel. My name is Liz, and this is The Quest In. In a nutshell, cognitive functions are mental processes, and you can think of them as muscle groups of the brain. Each cognitive function has certain strengths that develop over time as a result of repetitive use, similar to how a muscle gets stronger over time through exercising it frequently. Each of the 16 types have a function stack that orders the 8 different cognitive functions in a specific order to reveal what certain strengths and weaknesses that type typically has. The first 4 are conscious, while the lower 4 are considered shadow functions that are mostly unconscious with a repressed aspect to them. The first 4 I won't be really focusing on, except the fourth one actually. The first 3 I won't be focusing on in this video specifically. So today, instead, we're focusing on the bottom 5. So the fourth is considered our least preferred conscious function, also known as the inferior, or in John Beebe's terms, the Anima or Animus. The 5th is considered our opposite personality, sometimes also called the Nemesis. Our 6th is what we critiqued ourselves on, and some people call it the critical parent. John Beebe's archetype is like the witch or Senex, but I think critical parent is just a bit more clear. The 7th he calls the Trickster, but I like to say it's our blind spot. And the 8th is the demon function. I refer to it as the trigger function. Also, please go ahead and do yourself a favor by downloading my free MBTI guide if you want an easy resource to know how to read MBTI type, code, know the 8 cognitive functions, and which 4 functions each of the 16 personality types use. You can access it for free at thequestinpodcast.com/MBTI-guide. I'll also put it in the description for this episode. So, super exciting. Let's talk about the dark side. First, I'll kind of refer to a couple different framework ideas that I've learned from a really, really good book on these inferior functions in each of the 16 types. The book I'll link below, it's called Was That Really Me by Naomi Quink. But yeah, really great framework. She refers to the 4th function. We can use 2 different names. When it's unconscious, it's the inferior function. But when we use it consciously and, in a healthy way, it's more so just our least preferred function. And a couple conditions for eruption of the inferior function are that primarily there's a general lowering of our level of consciousness. So some common triggers might be fatigue, stress, periods of illness, or the use of alcohol or other mind-altering drugs. So a function, this is a process or a form, but the content of how these episodes might erupt come from a person's unconscious shadow. The unconscious shadow are things we're unable to acknowledge within ourselves. So these might be things such as undesirable character traits, perceived weaknesses, fears, lapses in morality, or even desirable traits that we don't really associate with ourselves. the first sign of an activated inferior function is projection. And some characteristics of the inferior function when it is activated is that a person could experience tunnel vision, a loss of sense of humor, and kind of like all or nothing or black and white thinking. Sorry that it loads every single time if you're looking at the slide. But anyways, the role of the inferior function is self-regulation. And now I'm going to go into how Myers and Yoon kind of both thought of the self-regulation aspect of the inferior function or the fourth function in different ways. So first, Myers, she had a very complementary view of what the inferior function served in each type. So she considered it a conscious adaptation via type development. And she believed that increasing our conscious degree of control was possible by developing these lesser preferred functions. She didn't pay as much attention to linking it to the unconscious. However, Carl Jung, had a very different view. He considered the inferior function to play a really important role in compensating for our personality. He considered it a safety valve for the psyche to avoid rigidity, excessiveness, or stagnation of primarily using our dominant and auxiliary function. And yeah, he considered it a signaling advice that would tell you when you're out of alignment. So it would tell you, hey, something in your life needs attention. You are either misperceiving or miscalculating something. And this inferior function is to help you to regulate back to a healthy place and get you in to a place with more self-awareness and more consciousness. So that was kind of like some framework background. Now I'll talk about how this actually looks for specifically the INFJ personality type. So an SE grip, the two types that are vulnerable to this are the INFJ and the INTJ. And what a SE grip looks like is that it's so opposite to how an INFJ and INTJ would normally behave if they were in a healthy mind space. So under stress, what that can lead to or what that can look like is the very unhealthy version of extroverted sensing. So extroverted sensing in its positive form is very free-flowing, creative, pleasure-seeking, and like just interactive with the world. But in an unhealthy form, what that looks like is impulsivity, lack of self-control, seeking instant gratification, prioritizing pleasure above all. It's a very reckless, hedonistic embodiment of extroverted sensing. And what that can also lead to is maybe some outburst of anger, some regretful decisions. Just think of someone who doesn't have self-control. And I think that is what an SE grip looks like. You know, particularly out of the 8 functions, I would consider the SE grip the worst. And I think for the 2 types that struggle with it, they could agree that it just feels so against your nature, because what is of the nature of the INTJ and INFJ is positive introverted intuition use. And what positive NI looks like, or introverted intuition, is a clear vision of your future goals, a clear path or plan in order to accomplish what you want to accomplish, regardless of how long it takes. And what SE looks like when it's unhealthy is a complete loss of that inner connection to yourself. It's so opposite, and it just feels like you don't have control of where you're going, even though you know where you're going is bad. So yeah, that one book that I referenced, Was That Really Me? It just had such a perfect description of what SE grip looks like. And as I read it, I could clearly understand a specific period of my life in which, for sure, I was in an extended grip stress situation, maybe about like 4 to 6 months of just such unhealthy decisions. But then the really crazy thing is, coming out of that, and in the book she talks about it too, is you just gain so much wisdom about yourself that in a way it's very, very enriching as a life experience, because it makes you aware of your unconscious that you wouldn't have access to otherwise. Like in a healthy situation, the things that I learned about myself, I wouldn't have been able to learn because there would be no reason to. But through that experience, I was able to identify what areas in my life needed deep work in order to like heal and become better, and just not repeat those same mistakes. And yeah, in the book she also talks about how like some people, they could go into like extended periods of this SE grip. And personally in my life, I have a INTJ mentor who for sure has gone through like years of SE grip. And I think it just feels like literally like two sides of a coin, where, one side of this person is so headstrong and knows where they're going, but in moments of stress, they turn into kind of like an impulsive dictator because they don't have self control. And so each type has this possibility, this negative possibility that they could completely go opposite to their dominant type under stress. And that's kind of the summary of what an SE grip or a grip for any type would look like. But okay, now we could get, sorry, I actually didn't change the cognitive functions of these. So I could either redo the whole video or we could ignore that I didn't change it. So instead of NI for this fifth function, it should actually be NE. So the opposite attitude, extroverted intuition, is the nemesis of an INFJ. And what that can kind of look like is NE is super, super creative. It's very exploratory. It likes possibilities. It's seeking ideas externally. But in a shadow or a repressed embodiment of it, what that looks like in the INFJ as well as the INTJ is that they are very good at summarizing or coming up with worst case scenarios. Like they are worry words that is unmatched because their mind just goes into this more negative place when it's coming up with possibilities as far as what they should worry about. And it feels opposite. And my recommendation for how to balance that out in any INTJ or INFJ is that you could see a healthier use of extroverted intuition, NE, in types that are dominant in that, such as the ENTP, INTP, INFP, ENFP. Those types tend to be pretty optimistic about future case scenarios. But that's just kind of what you sacrifice. Is you could either have optimism and maybe not be as prepared, or you could have pessimism and feel fully prepared. So in a way, I think INTJs and INFJs can actually appreciate this opposing personality, because when they do make a decision, they end up feeling like very, very sure about it, because they're like, I've thought of case scenario A, B, C, D, E, like they have backup plans. Particularly, INTJs will just list off, like, if this happens, then this, if this, then this. And I think INFJs can also develop that kind of thinking, but maybe they would do it in different case scenarios. I think INTJs, they'll like do it in preparation for like life and security. INFJs will do it in preparation for like optimizing personal relationships. Yeah. And then, so the sixth function, it's called the critical parent function, the critic. So this should actually be inferior feeling, not FE as it is on the screen, but inferior feeling for the INFJ as well as the ISFJ. And what that kind of looks like is that they're just super critical of their own personal values. If their personal values possibly sacrifice group harmony. And it's a clear sign of maturity that they stopped repressing inferior feeling when they're able to confidently own their own values, regardless of how others are going to react. However, in early years, just know this is a weakness of that type, or it's a habit of that type to be heavily critical of themselves and what they want and what they value. And it's definitely something they have to learn to not sacrifice in order for group harmony or like in order to please others. All right, so the trickster, that should be extroverted thinking. And the trickster, I mean, I think it's every type's least favorite. It's often noted in, books that it's just a spot of sensitivity. They know it's their critical point of weakness. But basically, it's someone's blind spot, and how it can be best described is it's what they undervalue in the world. And of the 8 cognitive functions, they completely miss the point and they're maybe not naturally good at it. So for the INFJ as well as the ISFJ, this is extroverted thinking. And what that kind of looks like is that maybe they're not the most efficient decision makers. Maybe somewhere along the way on their when they're trying to accomplish their goals, they just don't see the clearest path forward in terms of how to get there the quickest. And, people who are TE dominant could get pretty annoyed at this fact because it's just inefficient. It's not systematic. It's not connected to the external world of expectations. And yeah, it's a hard placement. In my own self, I know that it's such a weakness that there's some things that I just have to outsource because I know that I'm not good at it. If it's extroverted thinking, or I know that I have to give extra attention to learn how to do it properly, to learn how to do it well from other people who are extroverted thinking dominant. But yeah. And then, lastly, sorry, this also says TI, I think because I made a copy of the last slide, but this should say SI. So it should be introverted sensing. And introverted sensing as a demon function or anybody's demon function just kind of means that it's a trigger. And I think how I've learned what triggers me is that if I engage in introverted sensing for too long, well, it's usually other people engaging in introverted sensing and I'm absorbing that energy for too long. And for too long is like, as an introvert, it's anything over 2 hours. I just feel like I completely lose sense of my connection to reality. It doesn't feel good because it feels so opposite. So you have to think of introverted sensing and introverted intuition, NI and SI, as kind of like opposites. Introverted intuition, you're going into your mind, versus introverted sensing, you're going into your bodily experience. So it's mind and body. But introverted sensing, it's very focused on the past. It's very focused on like, my experience equals this in the present, versus introverted intuition, it's very focused on the future. And that kind of means like, my current reality is going to lead to this future path. So yeah, when someone is engaging in the past for too long, that's when I notice I'll just get so either annoyed or bored, or like my mind can't stop wandering because it's spending so much energy in order to engage in the details of like the past or the present. I feel really bad saying this, but it's like introverted sensing types, I can only be around them for so long if that's all they want to engage in. So what that looks like is, if someone just wants to tell me stories, like personal stories, like, today at work, this happened, or in the past, my mom did this, or like something like that, where it's just so specifically story oriented, without a greater sense of like a connection to a big principle or an idea. It's very, very draining. It causes so much attention to be allocated and energy to be given to try to stay focused that by the end of it, I feel very drained. Versus introverted intuition, I think it could learn about ideas and talk about like abstract concepts for hours and hours and hours. Like last night, I literally read for like 5 hours straight after my son went to bed. And all I could think of is, wow, like I wish it wasn't so late and I just had more time to indulge in like the books that I have and the ideas that I can engage in. And that would be an example of how, that's an activity that gives me energy versus if I spent 5 hours listening to people's personal stories without any like, extraction of principles, ideas, or frameworks, I would feel so drained by the end of it. And it's crazy because what that sounds like is actively learning is easier than passively listening for an NI dominant. And that's an example of how introverted sensing, or SI, would trigger this like response that feels like, oh, I just don't want that. It doesn't feel natural. It doesn't feel good. But yeah, okay. I hope I explained that well. This was kind of like a last minute video. Super sorry to the one subscriber that I promised this to be put out by Valentine's Day. It was just the craziest month. My life literally revolves around my son's sleep, and we just have not gotten a lot of sleep because we traveled and had a wedding. And yeah, life is just a little crazy. Don't mean to give excuses, but if you have kids and you have any advice on sleep or time management, I am all open to it. But yeah, anyways, see you guys next time. Thank you so much for joining me today on this question. If you got value from this and enjoyed this video, go ahead and like, comment, subscribe, get notified of my future episodes. Until next time, please take care.